Man has always feared the ocean, and for good reason. It is a world that does not belong to us, a vast, crushing darkness where the laws of surface biology do not apply. In 1912, humanity committed the ultimate act of hubris. We built a city of steel, filled it with the wealthiest people on Earth, and named it after the Titans, the gods who dared to challenge Olympus. We called it unsinkable. We believed that rivet guns and watertight bulkheads had conquered nature. But on the night of April 14th, the RMS Titanic did not sail into history. It sailed into a feeding ground. The Atlantic Ocean is eerily calm. Captain Edward Smith remarks that the sea is like a millpond, a flat black mirror reflecting the stars. This should be a comfort, but seasoned sailors know that a calm sea is dangerous. There are no waves breaking at the base of obstacles, no white foam to warn the lookouts of danger. The water is not just cold, it is freezing, holding steady at 28 degrees Fahrenheit. But there is something else in the water tonight, a subtle vibration that rattles the teacups in the first-class dining saloon, a low-frequency hum that the ship's engineers cannot locate. High in the crow's nest, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee are straining their eyes against the dark. They have no binoculars. They were lost in Southampton. At 11:35 p.m., Fleet sees something. It blocks out the stars on the horizon. It looks like an iceberg, a massive, jagged shape rising from the deep. But as the ship draws closer, Fleet notices something wrong. Ice reflects starlight. It glimmers white and blue. This shape does not reflect light. It absorbs it. It is a void in the darkness, a matte black mass that seems to be shifting, breathing. Fleet rings the warning bell 3 times. Iceberg, right ahead. He screams into the telephone, but his voice shakes. He knows it isn't ice. First Officer Murdoch orders the engines reversed and the helm hard to starboard. The massive ship begins its slow, agonizing turn. For a moment, it looks like they might clear it. The bow swings past the dark mass, but then the iceberg moves. It doesn't drift with the current, it lurches toward the ship against the flow of the water. The impact at 11:40 p.m. is not the grinding scrape of ice on steel. It is a wet, thudding collision, followed by a sound that no one on board can identify, a deep, guttural roar that vibrates through the hull plates, shaking the rivets loose. The ship hasn't hit a static object. It has woken something up. Deep in the boiler rooms, the stokers are not drowned by rushing water. They are drowned by a thick black slime that bursts through the buckled plates, smelling of ancient brine and decay. The unsinkable ship has just been grabbed. Midnight. The breakdown of the Titanic is usually described as a mathematical inevitability, 5 compartments flooded, the weight of the water dragging the bow down. But Thomas Andrews, the ship's architect, is staring at the blueprints in the chart room with a look of confusion that rapidly dissolves into terror. The damage report from the carpenter doesn't make sense. The water isn't just rising, it is pressurized. The bulkheads haven't just buckled. They have been bent inward like aluminum foil, crushed by an external force exerting thousands of pounds per square inch. Down in boiler room No. 6 leading fireman Frederick Barrett is not fighting a flood, he is fighting an invasion. The water swirling around his waist is thick, viscous, and glowing with a faint, sickly green bioluminescence. Through the gash in the hull, something massive forces its way in. It is a tentacle, thick as a redwood tree, covered in barnacles and hooked suckers. It wraps around a steam pipe, crushing the cast iron like glass. The steam explosion decapitates two stokers instantly, but the sound is drowned out by the groaning of the ship's keel. The Titanic is not sinking, it is being squeezed. On the boat deck, the band begins to play. It is a surreal attempt to maintain order, a British stiff upper lip in the face of the apocalypse. The passengers in their evening gowns and tuxedos are told it is a precaution. They are loaded into the lifeboats, women and children first, but as lifeboat No. 7 is lowered toward the dark water, the passengers look down and scream. The sea is boiling. The iceberg alongside the ship has opened its eyes. Thousands of them. The water around the hull is churning with smaller entities, parasitic offspring of the leviathan. They are the size of dogs, combining the features of isopods and eels. As lifeboat No. 7 touches the surface, the water erupts. The boat is capped instantly. There are no survivors to be pulled from the freezing Atlantic. There is only the sound of splintering wood and the wet tearing of fabric and flesh. Captain Smith stands on the bridge, his face pale as the moon. He holds a megaphone, but he gives no orders. He watches as the main mast, made of solid steel, snaps like a twig, not from the angle of the list, but because a massive wet appendage has risen from the abyss and wrapped around the crow's nest. The distress signal CQDS tapped out frantically by Jack Phillips in the wireless room. We are sinking fast. Passengers being put into boats. He pauses, his hand trembling over the key, and adds a final unauthorized message that is received by the Carpathia 50 miles away. IT is eating us. By 1:30 a.m. the Titanic is no longer a ship, it is a slaughterhouse tilting at a 15-degree angle. The lower deck steerage and third class have gone silent. History tells us the gates were locked to prevent the poor from rushing the lifeboats. In this timeline, the gates are locked from the other side. The stewards, seeing the green bioluminescent water rising up the stairwells, bolted the iron gates not to keep people in but to keep the things in the water out. It is a futile gesture. The swarm of parasitic entities, the size of wolves but with the fluidity of octopuses, squeezes through the ventilation shafts and the gaps in the bulkheads. The screams from the lower decks are not of drowning. They are the frenzied, chaotic sounds of a feeding pit. On the boat deck, the order dissolves into madness. Second Officer Lightler and First Officer Murdoch are armed with Webley revolvers. They stand by collapsible boat C, guarding it against a mob of terrified men. Suddenly, a massive wet tentacle slithers over the starboard railing, crushing a group of stokers into paste against the deck. Murdoch turns and fires bang, bang, bang. The .455 caliber rounds strike the rubbery, ancient flesh of the limb. They do nothing but annoy it. The limb sweeps across the deck like a windshield wiper, clearing 50 people into the sea in a single motion. The horrors move upward, infiltrating the bastions of Edwardian luxury. The grand staircase, the jewel of the ship, becomes the stage for the final invasion. The famous glass dome overhead shatters, not from pressure, but shattered by a falling smokestack that has been ripped loose by the beast below. Water cascades down the oak paneling, carrying the swarm with it. John Jacob Astor IV, the richest man in the world, stands by the clock, clutching a brandy. He watches as a creature with too many eyes pulls itself up the banister. His wealth, his influence, his empire, it all evaporates in the face of a biological hierarchy where he is no longer at the top. At 2:10 a.m., the ship's structure gives way. History attributes the breaking of the Titanic to the immense weight of the stern being lifted out of the water. But survivors in the lifeboats see the truth. The leviathan beneath the waves has wrapped its primary tentacles around the midsection of the liner. It is not gravity breaking the ship. The creature is snapping it in half like a dry twig to get to the meat inside the hull. The sound is deafening, the tearing of steel, the explosion of steam, and the screams of 1,500 souls. The stern crashes back down, crushing hundreds in the water before rising vertically. The lights flicker once, twice, and then go out forever, but the darkness is not total. Under the water, a massive green glow expands, illuminating the feasting that is happening just below the surface. The ocean is boiling with blood. At 3:30 a.m., the RMS Carpathia arrives at the provided coordinates. Captain Arthur Rostron is expecting to find a debris field, perhaps a few freezing survivors bobbing in cork life jackets. He has prepared hot coffee, blankets, and medical bays. He orders his engines stopped and fires a green flare into the sky to signal hope. But as the magnesium flare drifts down, illuminating the water in a harsh, chemical glare, the crew of the Carpathia rush to the railings and vomit. There is no debris field. There are no bodies floating in life jackets. The Atlantic Ocean, for miles around, is stained a deep, viscous purple, a mixture of oil, soot, and millions of gallons of blood. The water is eerily silent. There are no cries for help. The 1,500 souls who went into the water didn't freeze to death. They were harvested. Only a handful of lifeboats remain, clustered together in a tight, defensive circle. The survivors inside are not rowing toward the rescue ship. They are huddled in the bottom of the boats, covering their heads, paralyzed by a terror so absolute it has shattered their minds. As the Carpathia lowers its rope ladders, a survivor from lifeboat for the unsinkable Molly Brown screams at the sailors above. Don't stop. Keep moving. It hears the engines. Rostron looks down. The water beneath the Carpathia begins to glow. A deep, nauseating shade of iridescent green rises from the abyss. The sonar technology of 1912 does not exist, but the vibration through the hull is unmistakable. Something massive is circling them. The Leviathan, having finished the appetizer of the Titanic, has sensed a second course. The rescue operation becomes a frantic, violent scramble. Sailors throw nets, hauling up survivors with brutal speed, dislocating shoulders in their haste. They manage to retrieve 700 people. But as the last boat collapsible bee is hooked to the davits, a tentacle erupts from the water. It is fast, wet, and silent. It wraps around the lifeboat, crushing the wood and the people inside instantly, dragging them down into the green glow. Captain Rostron makes the hardest decision in maritime history. He does not stay to look for more. He does not wait for the sun. He screams into the voice tube to the engine room, full speed ahead. Give me everything you have. The Carpathia, her rivets groaning, churns the water, fleeing the scene. As they race toward New York, the passengers looking aft see a shape rise from the water against the horizon, a silhouette so large it blocks out the setting moon. It is not an iceberg. It is a shifting mountain of wet flesh, watching them go. The dominance of mankind over the oceans has ended. The Carpathia arrived in New York Harbor on April 18th, under a heavy veil of rain. But there were no reporters flashing cameras, no crowds cheering the survivors. The ship was immediately quarantined by the U.S. Navy. The official story released to the public was a boiler explosion caused by a collision with a submerged derelict. But the truth could not be contained. 700 people had seen the face of the abyss. There was silence threatened, institutionalized in asylums, or simply disappeared. The White Star Line didn't go bankrupt from lawsuits. It was dissolved by the British government to bury the evidence. The sinking of the Titanic did not just change maritime laws, it ended the age of the ocean liner. In 1914, when the First World War broke out, it was not fought on the high seas. There were no great naval battles like Jutland. Why? Because every battleship that ventured into the deep Atlantic vanished. The German U-boat fleet was decimated not by depth charges, but by biological pressure. The ocean had become a forbidden zone, a hunting ground for an apex predator that had been woken from a million-year slumber. Fast forward to the year 2025 in this timeline. The map of the world looks the same, but the infrastructure is radically different. There is no shipping industry. The global economy relies entirely on massive cargo, airships, and supersonic stratospheric planes. To look out the window of a flight from London to New York is to stare into a void. The Atlantic Ocean is empty. No oil rigs, no container ships, no cruise liners, just a vast, dark expanse that humanity has ceded back to the gods. Marine biology is a forbidden science. Satellites monitoring the North Atlantic gyre occasionally pick up thermal anomalies, massive heat blooms the size of cities moving deep beneath the surface. We don't call them icebergs anymore. We call them the Titans, and they are multiplying. The sinking of the Titanic was not a tragedy. It was a warning shot. It was the moment humanity realized that we are not the masters of this planet. We are merely guests living on the dry land, terrified of the rising tide. The ship lies there still, 2 miles down, not rusting in peace, but serving as a nest for the thing that broke it. This has been Chronos Mortis. The archives are deep, and the pressure is building. Which file shall we open next? The nuclear vampires of Chernobyl, or the zombie trenches of 1917? To keep the truth afloat, subscribe and ring the bell. The water is rising. Transmission end.